All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Unfortunately, my camera is not working. I'm not sure why, but hopefully you can hear my voice okay. I want to welcome everybody to the June Lunch, Learn, and Collaborate meeting where we're going to have a couple of presenters today. And I'm the host, Mark Peden, and I want to welcome everybody. Um, as always, I always like to start out these meetings with a few stats about our ITS REDCap. And so we currently now have active projects 456. 182 of those are in production, and a lot of creative thought going into 261 development projects. We have approximately 542 users, and 12 of those production projects are has Mozio enabled. Just a couple of reminders. This is a slide that has some QR codes and some URLs. We will be sharing the URLs at the end of this presentation meeting, as well as it'll be going out through email. But we have videos, tutorial videos, as well as some helpful texts from Vanderbilt University. We also are going to have some archives of previous Lunch, Learn, and Collaborates with this QR code. And then we have a self-guided training Canvas course at this URL right here. Just want to remind everybody, if you could, just to mute yourself during the presentation, and afterwards we will take questions about the two presenters. Today's presentations is Marcelina will be talking about piping, action tags, smart variables, enhancing projects using external modules, and creative approaches to solving common REDCap challenges. And then we have a guest speaker, Pendleton. She's in the College of Medicine. She'll be demonstrating her custom REDCap solutions and designed specifically for payment tracking. And with that, I will stop sharing, and Marcelina will be presenting her portion of the presentation.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be talking about creative uses in REDCap, a little bit about some of the tools that I think are super useful. Um, but before I get started, I just wanted to shout out we've been getting a lot of emails through REDCap at FSU because the way that alerts and notifications works is even if you set that to or that from email in there because of our firewall, it comes from REDCap at FSU. So we wanted to shout out the Dear Lab at the College of Medicine, who's added this nice message at the end of their alerts and notifications to users that says, please kindly use reply all to include the study email in your response. This ensures that someone from our team can assist you promptly. And we wanted to make sure that you are maybe including these in your alerts and notifications to participants. So that way, if they respond with any issues, we can at least know who to email, study email if they haven't replied all. However, otherwise, we're just kind of guessing based on the subject name. And as you know from Mark's portion of the presentation, there's a lot of projects already in ITS REDCap, which we're super grateful for. But just so that we can maintain good communication between your participants and your projects, we strongly recommend including these in your alerts and notifications. All right, so our agenda for the creative uses is to talk a little bit about smart variables and action tags, going a little bit more in depth on piping, embedding fields, and then survey-specific fields that might be good to include in your projects if you are using surveys, and then really helpful external modules. I'm going to highlight, we've had previous We've had previous LLCs that talk about external modules in depth, but these are two that kind of work hand in hand with action tags, and then cross-project piping also worked with Chandler's project. So to talk about smart variables and action tags, you'll see your smart variables in advanced branching logic and alerts and notifications. Um, there's a helpful like documentation page present in any space that you're using advanced branching logic syntax. And what you'll see when you're editing branching logic is two different options, whether it's advanced branching logic syntax or drag and drop logic builder. Those two are going to both have the field variables listed. But the smart variables will allow you to reference information other than the field variables. And when you are creating your field variable names, you'll have underscores as opposed to dashes, and your smart variable names will have dashes. So that's how you can distinguish and differentiate between the two. And they categorize the smart variables based on those that apply to the user, record, form, survey, events and arms, repeating instruments, and other events. And we'll kind of look at what that looks like on the next slide. These smart variables you can use in advanced branching logic syntax and alerts and notifications. However, if you transfer anything to the drag and drop logic builder, they'll be removed because the drag and drop logic builder only builds off of the field variables that you yourself have created. So when you click on that button, the documentation shows up and it shows you all the different names of the smart variables and the context in which you can use them. I wanted to highlight specifically here the survey duration one, which is a data point that is collected by REDCap. And you'll see that, we'll kind of see that later on when we talk about survey specific fields. But it's not actually something that can be exported unless you save this value within a new field. So survey duration, the format of the smart variable specifies the smart variable itself, the instrument that you want the survey duration for, and then the units, whether it's years, months, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. And it just depends on when the survey has been completed. For this particular example, you could just put the survey duration, instrument, and the units, but I think this particular example on the bottom highlights that you can specify the event name on top of also, if you have repeated instances, specifying which instance that you want the survey duration for. So for your repeated instrument, for the last instance, you can just specify it instead of saying like instance number 4, because we know that when you're making repeated instruments, they could be variable in terms of the last instance. There's other really helpful smart variables that come into play, like first instance or creating a new instance. I really like using smart variables for when I'm referencing a particular survey and I want to pull the URL for that particular survey and not having to like only use the public survey in the survey distribution tools. So when we're talking about action tags, we'll see those when we're editing any of our field variables, and that's going to be this red space on the bottom of our field labels. And it allows you to like do more customizations for the surveys and forms. Excuse me. You'll see that any action tags will begin with an @ sign, and you'll see that once you save the field itself. There will be specific actions within the action tags, and if you click on this button, you'll actually go through the documentation page that lists all the available action tags within our ITS REDCap, and then descriptions of what they do. So something that is really helpful is there's a lot of built-in action tags within ITS REDCap that comes standard with all REDCap instances. But anytime you see this like blue cube, shows that there's an external module that provides more action tags, and we'll talk about this later when it comes to external modules. And you can view the particular documentation for this, as this external module is going to come from GitHub. What's really helpful, I think, with the descriptions is oftentimes they'll have the exact like the context or examples of what the a use case for this particular action tag is. And again, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about action tags in our next month, so we can dedicate a full like 30 minutes to an hour talking about action tags, but I just wanted to highlight them because we do end up talking about them in our external module section of the presentation. Okay, so I call this section base controls because piping, embedding, and survey-specific fields are something that's already built into REDCap. And they're pretty useful if you haven't utilized them, and it's possible that you might not have already utilized them in your project, but I think it's really helpful to at least explore it as an option in case you don't want to type like particular surveys in every single time, or you want to be able to make a customized interaction with your participants. Okay. So, what piping is it's allowing you to inject previously collected data into text. So it's it's allowing you to show a value that's already been collected. On your design space, on the right-hand side, there's a pop-up that shows learn how to use piping. And this is the same as the other action tag or smart variable button that we've seen before that provides the documentation that kind of gives us examples of where you can use piping, which is a lot. There's a bunch of different spots where you can use it, and then what that kind of looks like. Something to keep in mind, since you can, in fact, use piping in your alerts and notifications message, there's a little checkbox there that says, would you like to enable or disable piping of data for identifier fields? And that's really important. If you already have your variables and field names like identified or specified as identifier fields, if they accidentally get populated within a message, and you don't want that PHI data to be available through email, which is not a secure way of communication, it will instead remove the value that would have been typically displayed and instead say like capitalized data removed with an asterisk before and after. So if you are getting that error when you're sending alerts and notifications and you don't mean to, this might be checked. So what does this look like in practice? In our design space, we have two different questions. What is your favorite ice cream? And then our piped value is the ice cream value or ice cream variable here within the question for how much do you love blank ice cream? What this looks like in practice is within the survey space or the data form, it'll have what is your favorite ice cream, but then it'll have a blank instead of that value since nothing's been selected here. When you do select a value, it will auto-complete what the value that you select. And now it'll say, how much do you love chocolate ice cream? And that way it's relevant. And it's taking data from the previous question. This is a way that we've used it within the request portal. If you've submitted a request for the REDCap team or others in the FSU Health Connections group, you'll sometimes get like, here are details below of your request. And what we're doing is we're essentially piping in information that was originally inputted into the initial request into this table. So this is just the regular typed in information. And then this can be variable based on what was inputted into the initial request form. And as you can see here, not only are we including the variable names, but we're also including our event names because within the request portal project, we have different events to specify where we are in the process. So something to keep in mind too, and something to explore when it comes to piping is that it's displaying all of the values. So when you're talking about checkboxes, there's a bunch of different configurations you can do. You can display the values of the checkboxes. You can display The answer choices, so you know when we're entering in fields, we have to specify like one is yes and then zero equals no. So you can display those instead. We're right now just displaying the values that are present when you're seeing it like similar to here, where we're seeing chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry, and that value is the one that gets piped um, in the space that we're looking for piping. So colon checked, we're kind of using those like smart variables in addition to our piping to get all of the values that we want here. Another way that we've utilized piping within the request portal as well is not only do we have it here in an um, internal space that specifies who's coordinating this request, we also have it so that anything that we type within this box will then be sent out as a customized, personalized message to our requesters. And then additionally, we have that same table that we saw before. So not only can you use piping in here to pull individual values, but we can use it to send a customized message that gets stored within the record as opposed to just living within the alerts and notifications. Um, so something that we've seen before in the previous slide is that when this value is blank, it'll leave a blank mark in there until that value is filled. What we can do to kind of navigate that and avoid that as an issue or a display is we just have the branching logic that specifies is as long as this value is blank, we don't have this field show up. So then when it does show up and this has a value, we do get a value for this piped field. So there is a difference between piping and field embedding. Piping is more displaying values that have already been collected, and field embedding is more displaying the field for answer choices like description, our notes or text field within the survey space so that it's more user-friendly for the participant. Um, but first, what we have to do is create the embedded field, and then we can embed it into another field. And instead of square brackets like we have for piping, we'll use curly brackets to embed the fields within other fields in the design space. Um, and since we're using that to collect more data, embedded fields can only exist in a limited amount of spaces, and this is typically within survey spaces or data form spaces, and not necessarily something that we would send out in alerts and notifications or utilize in branching logic. So what does that look like? Um, in our jumping back to the request portal because it just has like a plethora of examples of how to get creative with REDCap, we have a question that is which describes your affiliation, and you'll see here on the other space that there's a curly brackets field variable, and this is specified later on as a please specify a blank text box, which only will show up when other is selected. Um, I think the great part about field embedding is within the design space, you can already tell what's embedded and what fields contain embedded fields because they have these little pop-ups on the top right corner of each of the fields. So you know that if you don't see this please specify space, it's because this field is embedded somewhere else. Um, so when we're talking about embedded fields, we actually won't see this label here since it is embedded. We'll only see this text box and it'll pop up once other is selected. And so this is within the design space, but what does it look like in the survey space? This is like a customized enhanced button look. And what happens is when you click other, a text box will pop up, and I filled it in with tests just so that you know that that's a typable field. And I think it makes it really, it's a little bit more user friendly because you know that this text box is related to the other field as a participant and as a internal team member. And we can do we can embed fields within fields and fields. So this is three different embeds happening, or like two different spaces embedded in one. And what does that look like? We're asking what kind of assistance do you need across all of these different hubs. This is just showing off this particular REDCap box. The REDCap box has REDCap requests embedded in it, and then this also has another REDCap help services embedded in here. And these only show up, as you can see in the branching logic down here and down here. They show up only when REDCap is selected, and then REDCap help is selected is when this last box shows up. So it's something a little more interactive, and it doesn't require you to know that there's all these different options. As you can see from here, all of these individual checkboxes have their own embeds, and that's so we can make a cascading list of all the different services that are provided by each of these hubs. And you can also see here that it's not that one can only contain embedded fields and the field cannot be embedded. They both can exist on the same field. Okay, and then lastly in this section, I wanted to talk about survey-specific fields. You can see here that when you are at the top of any record that is a survey or record data instrument that is a survey, you'll get this space here that says the response was completed and all of this metadata that's not typically visible within the data instrument as a separate field. However, you can pull the survey identifier field and the survey timestamp field in your data exports, reports, and stats. You'll just have to select this additional report option in this space. So if a data collection instrument is a survey, it automatically collects survey identifier and survey timestamp, as well as survey duration, which we've looked at before with smart variables. However, survey duration is not something that can be included here automatically. And so you'll have to save this value as an additional field within the data instrument so that you maintain this data if you're transferring from one instance to the other. As we know from the ITS migration, survey data doesn't typically transfer over. They'll actually turn into forms when you transfer them over, and therefore you automatically kind of lose survey timestamp and survey identifier field unless you're already saving them in a different field variable name that's been created. So something again to keep in mind if you're keen on maintaining that data and keeping that data outside of just exporting your data, you should make them into separate fields. All right. I am going to pause for any questions that we have before we jump into external modules. I see a couple. Let's see. But maybe that's also... Okay, perfect. So, seeing none, just let me see. Do we also have any raised hands? Okay, seeing none, I'll keep going, but if you do have questions about stuff that I've already talked about, we can always talk about them at the end of the presentation. So, our two external modules that we want to talk about are hide, submit, and the cross-project piping. But if you're unfamiliar, external modules are packages of software that can be imported into REDCap, and they can be enabled in your project by a REDCap administrator. So if you see a external module out in the wild that you want to utilize within your project, just let us know and we can enable them. They're kind of like the creative uses like plus when it comes to REDCap, because it's not technically what's built into REDCap automatically, but there are a lot of cool things that you can do, and I'm only really showcasing two because we already have a whole presentation dedicated to our external modules. Your external modules will be listed on the left-hand side on the bottom right before the help and information, and if you go into manage, you can see all of the ones that you have already enabled for a particular project. And in this space, you can also see any action tags and API actions that are provided by external modules, which I think is really helpful. And we'll look a little bit on that when we talk about hide submit. So hide submit's really helpful. We can incorporate that into our action tag space. And typically we see that being used when so when we see that participants aren't answering all of the required questions, there is a pop-up that says like, hey, you haven't answered all of the required questions, but it doesn't stop the user from still submitting it. Um, but if we have the action tag hide submit, it does in fact remove the submit button so that there is no way for them to submit an incomplete version. We do this in conjunction with the branching logic. So if these variables are left blank, then we know that we need to hide submit. And then we have this additional pop-up. So um, that's one way of using the hide submit action tag. We again see those when we go to the action tag documentation page, and anything highlighted with the blue square that says that it's provided by the external module hide submit. And you can view the documentation for the particular GitHub on this link as well. So when you click on the action tags provided by external modules, you can see the whole list of specific ones from the hide submit action tag. And there's a bunch of different slight modifications depending on which buttons you want to hide. So the hide submit action tag will hide it whether it's a survey or it's a data entry form. And then there's ones customized based on whether or not you want to hide it as a form, as a survey, what kind of buttons you want to hide, and that kind of stuff. So if you're curious or if this might be a helpful use case for you, we would love to know. What does this look like in practice, though? Essentially, we have it so that in the request portal, any requester needs to fill out all the way until this last level so that we know exactly what to help with when it comes to REDCap assistance. So if only the top level for REDCap is selected and not the secondary level, we have a pop-up here that says, please select at least one REDCap choice. So that's checking if REDCap is selected, and then there's nothing selected for the next space. We have this hide submit. And I think this is really helpful to have when you're scrolling through not only your code book, but also your design space. You can see all of the enabled action tags in pink below. If you accidentally mistype, so I've done this a couple different times where I've actually accidentally typed in @hide dash submit, it actually won't show up in the space because it's not an enabled action tag. So it just kind of takes it as a field annotation. So what happens here is that only one is selected. We have this pop-up that shows up in a particular space, and this also means that there's no submit button at the bottom. However, if an option is selected all the way down to that third level, we'll get this submit button at the bottom as planned. Okay, and then our last external module that I wanted to showcase in terms of creative use cases is our cross-project piping external module. We've typically seen this when people are taking data from a screening project to actual study participants. So we don't want to transfer all of the data over if people have failed the screener, but we do want to transfer over relevant data for actual study participants. And then if you have multiple projects relating to a similar data set, so if you're utilizing multiple participants for slightly different modified studies and you want to collect the data all in the same space. So this is our configure page for cross-project piping, and it allows you to take data from the source project and pipe it into the destination project. What your cross-project piping external module will actually be enabled in your destination project, so it only has to determine what the source project is, what the matching field is, whether or not it's the record ID or an additional field, and then what fields you want to pipe over and where do you want to pipe them over to. There's a couple different piping modes. You can automatically pipe on forms that have that matching field, or you can have a piping button at the top of the form. So that way it's not an automated process. If it's an automated process, there's potential for overwriting of data. Um, and then enabling your verbose logging for any failures is helpful for us when we're trying to provide support if there are any issues as you're utilizing cross-project piping. Um, but whether or not it's automatic piping or a piping button at the top, you can specify whether or not you're able to pipe on forms that are incomplete or unverified. Um, just so that you can have a way of marking the status and you know that it's no longer automatically piping. You can check all these within the logs as it'll check whether or not you've made any changes to them. Um, but you want to make sure that you maintain control over what fields are getting automatically processed. If you have more than one field that you'd like to pipe over, you can add this plus and it adds all of these options again. Um, and then from here, I believe you can also pipe multiple projects depending, as long as you again have that unique match field. But I believe that is it for me. And so I want to introduce Chandler to kind of talk about her creative use in terms of a gift card request form that utilizes cross-project piping. So I'll stop sharing here and then I will. There
Okay.
you go.
Um, Hi, so as mentioned, my name is Chandler and I'm a biostatistician at the College of Medicine. And for a project that we are working on, we needed to be able to collect longitudinal survey data. And if they completed a survey, they would be eligible to receive a gift card. But we wanted to keep the gift card contact information that we need completely separate from the survey responses, just because we need, first and last name, address, email, phone number, really identifiable information. And we didn't want it linked at all to the survey. So I ended up creating two separate REDCap projects. And I kind of had done something similar in Qualtrics with the cross-sectional where I did two different questionnaires and then embedded one into the other. And so I did some Googling to try and figure out how to do it in REDCap, and this is kind of what I came up with. So we have the gift card project, which the only thing in here is just this form needed to have all the information that we need to give out the gift cards. And then the other project is the main survey. So this has our, survey that we're actually interested, all the information that we're actually interested in. And then at the very end, I just have a question saying, do you want to enter the drawing for a gift card? If they say no, the survey closes as normal. If they say yes, then it will automatically take them to this next form. And this is a just a descriptive text field. And in order to actually get them to the gift card form, I embedded the URL for the survey link to the gift card form into this descriptive text field. And what this looks like in in practice is for the participant side, they get the regular survey. And then, like I said, if they say no, it just closes out the survey. If they answer this, and then say yes, it will take them here. They can click the view media button and enter all of their information, and it will whenever they submit it, then they can close all of this out. All of this information will then be stored outside of this main survey. So if we come to the records, this is the one I just did. So we have this information and then the gift card question. Nothing is actually stored here. You have to go outside to the actual gift card project in order to get this information. And this is just a way for us to keep all of this identifiable information completely separate from the survey responses and not tied to, the same project or the same record ID. There's probably a lot of different ways that this could be done, but this is just kind of one way that I was thinking about with using Qualtrics and then doing some Googling. This just kind of seemed like a good way of potentially doing it for our project.
Awesome, Chandler. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was in fact incorrect, and you did not use cross-project piping, which I think is even cooler, which means that like you don't have to actually install the external module to do what you did, and keep the data separate. So um, thank you for presenting and being our guest speaker. But I'll let Mark take it away and wrap up our presentation.
I think these were two great presentations. I appreciate you both sharing those creative thoughts and uses of REDCap. Before I move on, I just want to see if there's any questions about Marcelina's presentation or Chandler's presentation. I'll pause a moment. All right. Well, if you do come up with any questions, please, you could send email to the redcap@fsu.edu. Follow up, and we'll gladly share our thoughts about your question or help on your question. Let's see if I can get this thing to move. Just want to review. We do have several links that I always like to share. As we did with Chandler, we always want to invite guest speakers to present something interesting, ways and challenges you may have had along the way of creating your project. And these QR codes right here and these URLs will be shared. If not at the end of this presentation meeting, it'll also be sent out at the end of the day with slides. Also, just want to remind you about the user requests, technical support, if you have REDCap issues or questions, Vanderbilt tutorials, self-guided Canvas course, and of course, any previous presentations that we have, you can find them in this URL or the QR code here. Just want to give you a heads up on what's coming up in July. We have action tags. To register would be this link here. Again, it'll be in the email that goes out later today. In August, we're going to do intro to REDCap. We do have a lot of students that will be coming back and jumping into REDCap projects, and so we just want to give a refresher tutorial to anybody that is new to REDCap, or if sometimes we get so knee deep and bogged down into our project, we tend to forget some of the simple things that may be helpful to solve in your own projects moving forward. In September, we're going to have using calculations. Believe it or not, calculations can be used for text, dates, numerics, all kinds of different calculations. So that's kind of going to be a cool presentation. I want to thank everybody for attending. Remind you that next month's presentation will be Wednesday, July 29th at 12:30. Our presenter will be Simi Reddy, and she'll be talking about action tags. I want to appreciate you, everybody, for showing up, and look forward to seeing you next month. In the meantime, I hope you have a blessed day. Thank you.